The study of anatomy is the study of structure. Each of you should have had an anatomy class, and I'm hoping that the anatomy that you studied has stuck with you. We will be discussing anatomy in context to physiology, but I usually don't spend much time reviewing it, and I won't spend much time, any time really, testing on it unless it is specifically related to the physiology, and you need to identify those structures to be able to identify the function. As we've already discussed, structure is closely linked to function, and so it's not surprising that anatomy and physiology are so closely linked to one another. The study of macroscopic structures is called gross anatomy. These are structures that are visible with the naked eye, such as the structures seen in this longitudinal section of the heart. You can see the chordae tendineae, the papillary muscles, you can see the ventricular wall, and so forth and so on. If we were to take a shaving of that ventricular wall, shave it off very, very thin, put it on a microscope, treat it to a staining or a fixation process, both actually, we would be able to see the microscopic anatomy. In particular, we would be able to see the cardiac muscle cells, their branches, their striations, their nuclei. We would probably be able to pick out the intercalated discs, and those would be considered the macroscopic anatomy of the heart. It is those things that can be seen only with magnification. Okay. Physiology, on the other hand, is the study of function. This class will be different than your anatomy class, and so if you come into this class thinking that it's going to be just more of the same, you're wrong. We're looking for the anatomical structures, yes, but mostly we care about what they do. Going back up to this previous slide, if you stare at the heart, you and pretend like you've never seen a heart, you've never heard anything of a heart. If I were to show this to my 5-year-old, for example, and ask her what does she think it's going to do, who knows what she would come up with. Just based on looking at it, you can't necessarily know automatically what its function is. But physiology has taken these hypotheses about anatomical structure and the function of anatomical structure, and through generations, hundreds of years of science, we have, using the scientific method, we have created a body of knowledge that helps us understand the human body. We don't know everything. There's many things that we would call a black box, which means an area that we are missing information for. We just don't know that particular area. And that's the nature of science. Science is a cumulative process. It builds, scientists build upon the knowledge of other scientists to get a bigger, broader picture. If we look at the figure on the right, this is what's called a Wigger's diagram. And this figure actually, and this figure here, the figure of the heart, and the Wigger's diagram are actually related to one another. The figure below, the Wigger's diagram, looks at the function of the heart, and in particular the pressures that build up within the ventricle of the heart. And you can't really see it all super well, but the aorta of the heart up here, right, as we know that the blood will be squished into those arteries and out of the body, and so the Wigger's diagram also shows us pressures in the aorta, which is missing from this, but we're going to pretend it's the aortic arch is up here somewhere, and it's going to look at also the pressures in the atria, which we can assume is approximately right there. Okay, so we're going to look at those and study these in much more detail when we get into the cardiovascular system. I'm not expecting you to know this for the exam, other to know that this is an example of function. This is what we're looking at. This is one way of looking at function. In this case, it's essentially the function of those muscles. It's putting the two pictures together, the ventricle, the cardiac muscles. What are they for? And it's for building up ventricle pressure. It's for building up atrial pressure. We've got those chordae tendineae, which are involved in regulating the opening and closing of the valves. and so on and so forth. And we'll get a chance to look at these in much more detail later. For right now, just know that this is an example of function, my illustrator.